Hello everybody, and I hope you're having a fantastic day. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the treasure spawn that just came out. Alrighty, so the gear pretty much works around the similar, like, I'm not sure if you guys and gals remember, but when that special spawn came out, like the second time, you know, like the one for 100 gems, and then the rest was like 33 cost guaranteed, they had this gear that was like bright blue and just mainly freaking black, and it pretty much had like the seal of attacks and all that stuff. This is pretty much that gear except different cosmetics, and I think either the male or female armor had a different ability, but pretty much at least half of the armors as well had reflection reduction. So that's pretty much this gear. So now you can obtain it, working on it, guaranteed, and you don't have to worry about spawning 100 gems to actually get it. It might cost more than actually 100 gems in here, but on the flip side as well, I don't think featured gear is going to have really high rates at the spawn, to be fairly honest. I think 700 will be the actual, like, what you would be likely to get, the 700 medals, because 700 medals is nowhere near getting a armor piece from here. You would need to get 700 medals 3 times before you could get one, and as we all know, those are jackpot rewards, and you have to spawn. It's going to be 1 out of 6 of the boxes, so you're not going to get it right off the bat. So I would believe that they would have 700 medals, so you can obtain this before 100 gems, but most likely you're going to obtain this after 100 gems. But on the flip side, you're able to gain a armor or weapon piece of your choice, unlike the special spawn. So this is a lot more, I would say, friendlier in my opinion, but it will help a lot more than the special spawn because of these factors. Yes, this stuff's worth it. I just pretty much talked about and compared it to another piece of gear or another gear set. This stuff is definitely worth it. If you need a couple, if you're running low on costs, throwing on a couple of these would help. I wouldn't throw these on in everything you have. That's your choice, to be fairly honest. But for the best performance, in my opinion, I wouldn't throw, like, have straight up all seals ofs, because you will really only need a certain amount of cost, and these proc pretty commonly. Even if they're not in your main slot, they proc pretty commonly. So worrying about the proc rate is something you don't really have to do, because for these proc pretty dang often. So I'd say around 3 or 4 to 2 would definitely help you out, and then the rest would be whatever skills you have that are helpful towards your class. That's how I would work, to be fairly honest. And for the reflection reduction, this is definitely a player versus player armor you want to have. This can be useful if you're a really low defensive class, like archer or berserker perhaps, but for the most part, I mean, reflection reduction is something you could completely avoid. You could use, like, if you're a lancer or soldier or a berserker as well, or like a mage. Especially if you're a mage, it's not too worrisome because the best move for mage, star burst, already ignores that. So it really depends on how quickly you would die in, like, guild battles in Coliseum, and if it's because of barrier or not. It may be for you, it may not be for you. Okay, so moving on from there, we're going to be talking about the new monster, Anna. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of them throwing a crap ton of females and calling them monsters, but this one right here looks pretty cool, to be fairly honest. And it actually, you know, has like a concept of like it being sort of like monster-like. So good job, 18. If I like came out with something that kind of looks monster-like and actually looks cool as a female monster on top of it, I'm not complaining. But anyways, going on from there, this is what we do have to worry about, the ability, because if we're going for this monster, then the ability needs to be known, especially like if it's a pay to win monster, like you actually have to use a lot of gems to obtain this monster. You definitely want to know about the monster before you actually spawn this, unless you get it on your first try, which is very unlikely, but can happen for probably a very few people. Like, let's say this video got like 500 views, right? Maybe like 5 out of those 500 views or less would get like the summoning scroll on their first try. Everybody else would have to work towards the summoning scroll. Anyways, moving on from there, this monster is definitely a player versus player monster. Kind of ironic because they made this to help around the player versus enemy mission that just came out. I'm not sure what it's called. It's like the vessel of something, or like the dragon, so I can't think of it, but it pretty much goes around this box spawn, and it's just completely player versus player, so that's pretty dang funny. As you can see right here, ability power 200, hits 4 times. That right there, pretty dang good damage. It can be deadly, and depending on the people you're fighting, it can literally one-shot them. So depending on the people you're fighting, can one-shot them. Like, let's say A rank. If you're like mid A rank, if you're mid high A rank, something like this may be able to one-shot mid high ranks. Somewhere between mid and high is what I'm talking about. Mid ranks and lower for A rank guilds. This should one-shot pretty much everybody, or close to everybody. Anyways, going on from there, it removes buffs from all enemies. A great player versus player ability to have. Player versus enemy can be useful depending on the situation. This is a situational thing, because like say like you're doing a super united offense and it has like that in there, like no buffs for the monster. This could be very useful for that. Or perhaps you're dealing with a monster that buffs, but it buffs very limitedly, like during a certain amount of health, or when a certain amount of time passes, it starts to use moves and only buffs like to that certain extent. This could also be useful for that. It really depends on the circumstance. The cast prohibit Unison all enemies, and the despair is definitely a player versus player ability. Not going to be useful in player versus player at all. Monsters it doesn't make sense. Monsters don't unison, because monsters are already monsters. They don't transform to monsters after they're monsters unless they're like shapeshifters or whatever. And even if they did, I don't think that would be called a unison, to be fairly honest. I think they would just add it as a move, or perhaps like throw resurrection on the monster or something in return, to be fairly honest. So definitely these are going to be useful in player versus player. These are pretty good debuffs for the enemy team, because despair pretty much works to the point where it pretty much lowers the unison. Like say like you're using cheer for the enemy team. If the whole enemy team has despair, they lose 5 unison instead of gain it. And prohibit allows them not to be able to unison at all, but in return, all that's needed to really avoid this is a mass refresh. And let me tell you, if there's a cleric on the field, it's not going to be hard for them to do that, because the cleric has no confusion, has no paralyzation or anything. So this would be a nice combo to use with Odin and stuff like that. But overall, keep in mind that this could be removed with a simple mass refresh. And on top of it, the archer has a better ability for despair, because they cast despair at a success value of not just 70 but 80. So the archer actually has its own move that actually casts despair at a better success value than its monsters, which is kind of ironic. Then this monster recovers 20 costs from all enemies. This is definitely a player versus player monster. It recovers 20 costs for all allies, and they cast frenzy on your character. Player versus enemy buff right there. So pretty much when you're supposed to be having like all these status alignments, they're nullified, or any debuffs, they're nullified. Now if you do get buffed, like so let's say you got like 10% more attack, even with frenzy that gets removed. It just doesn't turn to 10% less attack. So with frenzy it still gets removed. I'd recommend hero instead of frenzy overall, because that would be better to use. But frenzy is a nice neutral ground when it comes to player versus enemy late missions. And with that being said, I will be moving on to the rates. Alrighty, so in the spawn, they don't exist in the spawn. A 6.01% chance. In the jackpot, you could get the jackpot easily within your first try. The jackpots are not exactly hard to spawn. Sometimes people will get unlucky. If you're doing a treasure spawn, you may get this on your 5th try each and every time. Some people may get this on their 1st try. It really all depends, to be fairly honest. This one's a lot more randomized than most things you will be dealing with in a team. What you will be getting out of it's not exactly randomized, but getting the jackpot or getting one of these chests or one of these rewards is far more randomized than most things they would have working in Unison League. Alrighty, so in the jackpot, they have the summoning scroll, feature gear, and the treasure medal. You're very likely to earn the treasure medal. Feature gear can be obtainable as well, But feature gear is more of uncommon, and then for the rare we got the anti-summoning scroll, so getting the summoning scroll may happen or may not happen at all. Scrolls have low rates, so keep that in mind. What I do like though is that they offer drops of Ether Awakening orbs. That's pretty fair. Cost 26 or higher SSR gear. They changed that to cost 27. I think that'd be more fair, because now they even have like 32 cost weapons and armors in events. So I think that would be more fair for them to add the 27 cost instead. And pretty much just treasure medals. Overall, it looks like they offer 1,300. So that's around the average amount they offer. And the stuff is 1,900, so it's not too expensive to obtain. I would not recommend the one wing stuff unless you're getting it for cosmetics. And this stuff right here would be only really recommended the purge stuff if you perhaps, let's say, you have as much cost on your character as you could use, and you still have like 30 extra cost or something like that. Purge stuff is definitely not bad to use at all. Oops, wrong thing. Purge stuff pretty much has the damage down. If you turn it, it turns to XL after ultra rare. It decreases the amount of physical and magical damage you're taking. I'd recommend an art of overall, but damage down can still be helpful instead. And then they have the weapons right here, and they have abilities to replace the attacks. So if you need to replace your attack, definitely look for these as well. But again, I'd only worry about these if like you have like only 30 costs for whatever slot that you have, and you just need something to fill it in and get a little extra gear score. That's all I recommend the purge for. Other than that, I really only recommend the feature gear or the summoning scrolls through the treasure medals. And with that being said, I hope this helped out, and I will see you in the next video. This is the AzureWrath. I'm out. Peace.